Hello, everyone. Jen Wells here with Gigi Gaul. Confession, I know that the video started before I started the finger countdown, but that's a better opening than me being like, is it started yet? Um, to get started, I was going to give you a little bit of information about Gigi's background, but she just told me that since we set up this event and made the event graphic, she got a new job. So I'm actually going to let her tell us about what her current role is and maybe a little history on how she got there.
Sure, absolutely. First, I just want to say thank you to Jen and BrandSwan for having me and letting me speak on a really interesting topic that I'm passionate about. To give you a little bit of background about myself, I work for Wilmington University, currently in their College of Arts and Sciences as an admin, and I also teach as an adjunct instructor. And since we started setting up this speaking engagement, I'm actually going to be transitioning into a new role with our online learning and educational technology department. So that'll be focusing on our multimedia learning platforms, and I'm going to be a multimedia learning technologist. I'm really excited about that. I'm going to be going through the transition in the next few weeks, currently training someone new for my position, but it will be a fun October month.
So congratulations, obviously. And Kate Cottle agrees with me, and so does Jen Litzinger. So we've got people joining us already for this conversation. Hello,
Kate
everyone.
Works with me. Hi, Kate Cottle. Hi, Jen.
Okay. Oh, you know what? I am being sloppy. I didn't have my questionnaires up. Okay.
That's okay.
So we talked, about your background, but let's actually start with, I was going to talk about, your history, but let's first just define perfectionism for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the questions you immediately asked me, when did I start noticing perfectionism? Do I consider myself a perfectionist? And sometimes I think when you consider the word perfectionist, it kind of has a negative connotation to it, right? I don't really like walking around and saying, hi, I'm Gigi and I'm a perfectionist. I don't think a lot of people would like to work with you when you say that. But when I actually think of perfection, I think of it, I break it down into several different parts. So it's about the expectations you set for yourself, but also the expectations that other people set for you as well. And I consider perfectionism to break down into 4 different parts. So it's ourselves when we want to be a people pleaser. So how do you want to please other people? And that goes along with others' expectations of yourself. It also goes with comparison. So perfectionism, sometimes we find ourselves comparing what we are doing in our lives to other people. And it also has this part of fear of failure and vulnerability that I think are really important to consider when you think about perfectionism. So what happens if you step out of your comfort zone and you fail? Sometimes people are afraid to fail because they want to look perfect on the outside. But also they might be afraid of being vulnerable in front of different people. So perfectionism sort of has that fear of wanting to share your story, or that fear of showing that maybe your story isn't the perfect book story. So really when I think about what perfectionism is, it's all about those expectations. How many times maybe have you created an expectation for yourself and then later on might find yourself not meeting it, and then you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't meet my goal.
Like every day.
And I'm like, is that even realistic of me to say that I was going to do all that in a 24-hour period? So that's what I think of what perfection is just how do I set my own expectations, and how do I live up to them, and how do I set realistic expectations for myself?
Those 4 areas that you mentioned, is this your own theory, or did you kind of build that off of other resources?
So I built it off of several different resources. I've been reading 2 different books that I wanted to share with you guys about embracing imperfection, so to speak. And that's sort of where I came up with these 4 different topics of, where does perfectionism come from, And the 2 different books that I'm reading right now, and they're great resources, which is why I wanted to share them with people, is The Gifts of Imperfection. This one's by Brené Brown. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, I actually started one of her books and I didn't finish it. And I feel embarrassed because I'm like, everyone says she's so good. And I'm like, why couldn't I finish it?
This one's a really good one. And I'm only halfway through it, to be honest, but just the things that I've been reading about it, she talks about this topic of wholehearted living, which is really interesting, and how wholehearted living is made up of courage, compassion, and connection. But then the other one that I also have been reading about is Brave, Not Perfect by Reshma Saujani. Have you heard of her?
Ooh, no, that's new to me.
So she started the company Girls Who Code. And I actually had a chance to see her in a conference, the Pennsylvania Conference for Women last year. Awesome speaking. And her entire platform with this book is about how young girls are taught, and sort of how society sort of teaches us that we want to be perfect and we want to be people pleasers and we want to do everything right. But sometimes that keeps you from stepping out of your comfort zone and being brave. And how do we teach young girls to be brave, to take risks and feel supported in doing that?
Yeah. Sorry. So what's interesting about that?
So that was just I was gonna say those are the two that sort of have brought me into the topic.
Okay. I'm sorry, guys. Wild tangent. So as a parent with two small kids, when I was pregnant, I was reading all the stuff about parenting and raising kids. And something that came up was that we teach, we put our own biases on our kids. So like little boys, we let them climb things, we let them explore. We never tell them to be careful. Maybe not never, but less often. And little girls, it's like, careful, watch out, don't fall, don't slip. So that's interesting, because I guess that's another way that we're teaching them not to be brave. Not only are we like sheltering them, but then also you have to be careful and you have to be perfect. And I would love to hear more about that.
Absolutely. Yes, I would highly recommend you read this book. Another one that I'm in the progress of, but she also has a TED Talk out there that's about 12 minutes long, even if you just want a quick snippet of it. But that is really what she focuses on, is like, how are we setting our girls up for success as young girls so that they don't live a life where they feel like they need to be perfect, and perfectionism is around the corner, and they need to uphold to society's standards and create unrealistic expectations for themselves. And I really like that too, because I have a younger niece who's 9, and I'm always trying to like push her out of her comfort zone and encourage her in certain ways. Like, she rides her 4-wheeler in the backyard, and I'll be like, if you fall off or you're jumping on, just keep going, step out of your comfort zone. Don't be afraid. If someone tells you no, or maybe you fail, that's okay, And we hear that a lot when you hear statistics about women applying for jobs. And you hear sometimes as a woman, we might need to look at our resume and make sure we check every single qualification, and it has to be perfect before we apply.
Yeah.
But
and also women only apply if they fit like 90% of the qualifications, but men apply if they fit half of them, because that's good enough.
Exactly. Yeah. Sometimes I just consult my dad and I'm like, Dad, should I apply for this? I think so. Just tell me I should do it. Hesitation.
I never thought of that. That's a great perspective check.
Yeah. And I use my dad. My dad's one of my favorite mentors, but I do use him, especially because he is the opposite sex. And sometimes he's the one that'll tell me like, no, don't be afraid. Do it.
Yeah.
Be brave. Don't feel like your resume has to be perfect for this job. You can do it. You have the capabilities. Step out and go for it.
Yeah. Well, that's a good lead into your background, because it sounds like your dad at least probably taught you to be brave, but then how did you start noticing like this perfectionist tendency in your own life? How did it kind of impact you? And at what age did you even become aware of it?
Yeah, so I would say, I think I started becoming aware of it when I was in college a little bit more. And I think I started to become more of an overachiever. And when I would start to overachieve and want to be involved in so many different things, I would start to realize that I didn't have the greatest strength in saying no. That's another one that I think kind of goes hand in hand with perfectionism. So if you want to be a part of so many things, you want to make sure that you're saying yes to the right things and no to things that aren't bringing you joy or happiness. Because if you're accepting all of these different things, eventually something falls short, and then you have this expectation that you failed. And I think that's really important to realize, like, failing's okay. And in college, I definitely noticed it because I would just get involved in volunteer work, and then I'd be doing school, and then I'd be working a part-time job, and then I'd be juggling family commitments and things like that. And I've got all these expectations for myself that I want to be something to each one of these different corners of my life. And then I realize if I don't meet them, you feel like a failure. And I think what's really important, and I've noticed this a lot in my generation, is recognizing that it's okay to say no. It's okay to, look at something and say, you know what, I'm going to say no right now because I don't think this would fulfill me. And I think later on I might be resentful of it that I said yes.
Yeah.
I'm sure you can agree. Sometimes that happens.
Oh my God.
I can't tell you how many times Brene Brown in her book, she talks about this idea of saying no and choosing discomfort over resentment. And so when you consider, somebody asks you, can you, come over to my party, help me decorate, or can you plan this event, or can you help work on this committee? Before you say yes, consider if it's really fulfilling and bringing you joy. But also, if you want to say no, you're choosing the discomforting moment of saying no. But in the long run, you're not going to have resentment because you said yes.
And if you're a people pleaser, another way to think about that is that, resentment only hurts me, right? It doesn't. It damages your relationship with that person, because now instead of, being a close friend, you're going to be thinking about how they use you, or they keep asking you for stuff and you don't want to. Like, you could be better friends with them if you just said no in that moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the best advice I got about that, because I was like, okay, well, how do I know when enough is enough, right? Like, I've said yes to a few things and I didn't mind, but I'm getting to the resentful point. And how do I know where that line is? And it was actually my business partner, Jane, who said, as soon as you start to resent them, that's when you stop.
Shout out to Jane. True that. And I think it's really important too with perfectionism, create healthy boundaries for yourself, and recognize when an expectation is too high, or when, if I have this expectation that I'm going to serve on 3 different committees and this board, and I'm going to also teach, and I'm going to also do this job, and then I'm going to take on a new job. Okay, where are my boundaries? So considering like what's a healthy boundary, because the last thing you want to do is put your hand in too many pots, and then you can't actually give the time to the things that mean the most to you.
Yeah. There's another book.
Yeah. That's
Sorry. Essentialism. Have you read that one? Okay.
No, I have not.
Essentialism, I mean, if you want to just break it down into one sentence, it is say yes to the 9s and 10s and nothing else, right? And that's advice we've all heard, but essentialism really digs down into like why and how to do that, and really cut out, like, I think we're not forced to assess our priorities because we do have enough time to do a lot of different things, and how do we choose which one? And if I just stopped watching TV, I could fit more in there. But then for me, like having kids, running a business, and then quarantine. Oh man, okay, I got nothing else. Business, kids, that's it. And I would like to add some other things back in eventually, but for now, that's all I got.
And I just want to give you a shout out, shout out to all of those moms that are going through quarantine and that are, having to do this homeschooling and this education and working while it's all happening, and the dads, because there are dads out there that are doing it too. That's another thing that when you think of perfectionism, just recognize that you are enough, and recognize that you're doing enough by being there for your kids, by being there for your job, and by balancing it all is okay, and it's okay to balance that and realize that those are the most essential things in your life. I had somebody share at a networking event a few days ago, it was like a week ago actually, a really cool analogy that she shared with me, because I asked her, how did you balance this program? How did you do this while you were working and getting married, everything? And she said, life is like juggling, and you have several different balls that you're juggling at any given time. And some of those balls might bounce when you drop them, and they just bounce right back up and you can catch them later. But other ones are made of glass, and when you drop them, they're going to shatter. And she said, so what's really important is prioritizing what's a glass ball at that given moment or time. And sometimes it might be your job. Other times it might be your mom in the hospital. Sometimes it might be your family or your friends, and other times you might have to drop the networking ball, etc. So even just talking about the moms that are doing homeschooling, or the parents that are working from home while juggling it all, you're still juggling, and you're holding on to those glass balls that you don't want to drop, because those are the ones that are most important. And I think that is also a good analogy to consider, that it's okay sometimes to drop a ball as long as it's going to bounce back. As long as it's not one of the glass balls.
Well, and like recognizing that they're not all glass because it feels like it.
Yes, sometimes. And that goes back to those expectations that I talked about. Creating realistic expectations for yourself that it's okay that not everything is a glass ball. And sometimes like stepping back and recognizing that this time with your family or this walk with your dog is more important to you right now and your mental health and well-being than doing something different.
Yeah. I know. So this is like more about being in the moment, but that's one thing I've been struggling with because I write down on paper what my priorities are, and then my actions don't actually follow through with that. And I struggle with that. Like why is there such a big disconnect between what I say is important and then what I do?
Definitely. I think sometimes that has to do with prioritization, but also kind of where your heart lies. Like that happens to me too, where I'll make a list on a Sunday that I'm going to get to all this grading and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. But then something comes up where I have an opportunity to spend time with my aunt that I don't normally get to see. And so then instantly I'm like, you know what, as much as I want to be doing that work that's important to me, this is just so much more meaningful to me, is spending this time with this loved one. Sometimes it's about prioritizing what's meaningful and brings you joy. Obviously you can't drop the ball with work stuff long term because we both know that. And that's happened to be, where you play catch up on things, but sometimes building that priority of what is important and recognizing that a lot of the things that maybe seem important and they cloud your mind a little bit are not nearly as important. And I try to remind myself of that too. If I'm so worried about a big project or I'm so worried about something that's coming up on Friday, and then I say, long term, a year down the line, 2 years down the line, 20 years down the line, is this really going to be what's causing me stress? Or was this really as important as getting to spend that afternoon with my aunt,
Right.
And I think those are really important kind of points to consider when you're balancing everything and prioritizing everything.
Yeah. It's funny that what will I remember or how will I be remembered on my deathbed? That kind of way of thinking has actually encouraged me to say yes to some things. Like there have been other things that are no's, but like, will I be proud that I sat in the basement at home with my kids and let them watch TV? Probably not. Like we're going to go out and make a memory.
No, and Brene Brown talks about that a little bit in her book too, how like letting go of perfectionism helps you to prioritize what's most important and say no to things that aren't and say yes to more things that are, say yes to more things that are actually more fulfilling and bring you joy and perhaps don't even take nearly as much work sometimes. Like sometimes the things that bring you the most joy in your life don't take you nearly as much effort.
Yeah. We're just going to keep referencing books this whole time.
I know, right?
Gretchen Rubin, The Happiness Project, one of the things that she said was that we get, she probably mapped it out because she's got numbers and statistics for everything, but like we get as much happiness from anticipating and from remembering things as we do in the moment itself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which was great because it's like, for vacations and stuff, like it's good to start planning way early and be thinking about it and keep reminding yourself that it's happening. Because if you just
exciting.
wait, and then you're back, it's like, it's over. It's anticlimactic. So
and then reliving it too.
Yeah.
Like looking at your old pictures and, kind of remembering what you enjoyed too.
Yeah. But that's been a big motivator for me to get out and do stuff with the kids because kids are exhausting and like nothing's fun for more than an hour. There's going to be a tantrum. There's going to be a meltdown. There's going to be a poopy diaper. Like something's going to happen.
Yeah.
But when I anticipate it, I'm not thinking about that. And when I'm remembering it later, it's like, you know what? We did have a good day.
You remember more of the fun part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And you kind of want to think about that too, long term. Like, what am I going to remember that's just going to be so joyful in my mind long term? As I was preparing for this, I sat down and I started to think, like, what have been my most joyful moments over the past several years? And have you ever thought of that? Just like, if you were going to write down a list, like what has brought you the most joy? Just moments. And instantly I'm thinking of, sitting around the fire with my aunt last weekend and, spending time with my niece on her four-wheeler, like those little things that really didn't take much effort or preparation for me, but they were just in the moment. And they were actually what brought me the most happiness in saying yes to doing them.
Yeah. Yeah. Being spontaneous with my kids, that's hard for me. Like I picked them up from daycare and the 3-year-old says, I want to go to the grocery store. I'm like, we don't need food. Why would we go there? But he likes it.
Yeah.
So, okay, we'll get in the car. We'll wander around. We'll buy a banana.
I love that. But he's going to remember that too. He's going to remember all the grocery store trips that you guys took together, and like that's really special.
He's getting, okay, so around 3 or 4 is when most people have their first memory. And I think about that because I'm like, what is it going to be? Is it going to be when I'm yelling at him? Is it going to be doing something fun? Like, have we already made the first memory?
I bet you he's going to remember more of the happy moments with you than any of the yelling or scolding moments, because I can hardly remember any of those growing up, but I'm sure they happened.
Yeah, actually, okay. People watching, do you remember, like, what's your first memory? And is it a good one or a bad one? Because I had a theory about this. And a lot of my very first ones are bad, but I think it's not because a lot of bad stuff was happening. I think it's just those are the things that like shocked me and stuck in my head, right? So it was like, and no one was bad to me. It was like I opened a window and the alarm went off because we lived in an area where it was, better to have an alarm on your house. And my parents came running into the room and they had these looks on their faces. They just looked terrified because they thought someone was breaking into our house. Yeah. I just opened the window as a little kid because I saw the neighbor come home and I wanted to wave, and like it set off this big chain reaction I didn't expect. So like, that's not a horrible memory, but it stands out because it was scary at the time. So
yeah, absolutely. I think when you're a kid, it definitely does, like fear stands out sometimes from those kind of moments. Because it's funny, as you say that, I'm trying to think back to my first memory, and I think of I was probably like 4 at the time, and I had a girl friend over, and we completely trashed my room. We took every single toy out of every single area, and the entire floor was covered. And I just remember seeing my dad standing in the doorway with her dad, and like, what do you do? And that's all I remember. And I think I was 3 or 4 at the time, and he didn't yell at us. They didn't yell at us. It was more just like, y'all better clean this up. It's going to take you a while. Just remembering that like shock on his face was kind of a funny memory. And immediately I'm like, uh-oh, this was not good, was it?
Oh, that's funny. Okay. Well, I took us way off of my interview.
No, that's okay.
So
that's the best part.
I was going to say, we talked about like you realizing that you had this perfectionism thing with all of the committees, but I don't think we really got into, okay, so this is a thing. What did you start doing about it? And like, how did you,
I think some of the best tips, like I mentioned, I started reading and like watching talks and doing research into like other people and how other people like, try to battle perfectionism and recognize that being imperfect is totally okay. And a couple of the things that like this kind of goes along with giving tips to people is I learned to give myself grace. And I learned to say, everything doesn't have to be done right away. In a 24-hour period, if I made this list and I only checked off 4 of the 6 things that I wanted to do, that's okay. And perhaps there was something else that happened, and recognizing that I'm doing the very best that I can. I also, really took the time to think about not setting crazy expectations for myself and instead set achievable goals. I think sometimes as a society, we set these expectations of where we need to be. And then we realize if we don't make it in the exact time frame that we want to be, then it's unrealistic or we feel like we failed. And so taking the step back to realize, it's okay if the timeline doesn't work exactly how I want it to. And that's okay to set goals that can be modified. And something else that I've really been working on too is being okay with failure and not taking it personally, which I think is really important, especially if there's, you step out of your comfort zone. Maybe you don't get the job that you wanted, or maybe you just stepped out of your comfort zone and you're doing something and it didn't happen exactly how you wanted it to happen. And recognizing that failure is okay because that's a part of imperfection and we all fail. And sometimes we want to make it seem like we don't fail, but that's okay. I think the best thing you can do is be vulnerable with different people and share those failures and share, oh, I tried this one time and it totally didn't go how I planned it to be. Or, sharing your experiences as a mom and recognizing that, my kids had 4 tantrums in the grocery store and we still got through it. But sharing that, and I think showing vulnerability to one another is where you really build that connection. And Brene Brown talks about that a lot in her book, is vulnerability and embracing your story, embracing who you are, embracing what your background is and what brought you to this point in your life, and not being afraid to share that with other people. And when you're vulnerable, what happens is you have that compassion with one another, and you form a better connection with people. You form a lot more lasting connections and you create a better impact. So those are a few tips that I've used to help, grow and strengthen my idea of perfectionism. One of my favorite quotes that I have sitting right here on my desk, actually, and shout out to Kate Cottle, who's probably watching this. She gave me the quote, "Perfection is the enemy of progress."
Yeah.
I put that on my desk because I needed to remember to not be so hard on myself and realize, you know what, if I don't get this done, or if it's not exactly perfect, that's okay, because I'm still making progress every single day. And when I'm brave and I step out of my comfort zone and I try new things and I take risks, that's when I make progress. The other one that I have on my desk is, it's easier to be authentic when you take the pressure of perfection off the table. And I think that also goes along.
Wait, say that one again.
Okay. It's easier to be authentic when you take the pressure of perfection off the table.
Okay. Got it.
I got that one from another article, and that one sits there too, just because I think being vulnerable and being your authentic self, it's so much easier to do when you don't feel like you need to be perfect, or you don't feel like you need to live up to society's expectations of what you should be, and you have reasonable expectations.
Yeah, I was gonna say, one of the things that I struggled with, or maybe not struggled with, but the whole idea of identity. So, you're saying like be yourself and share that with people. And I felt like I didn't know who I was for a very long time. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I was gonna say, like, I don't know,
I
first you have to
totally
find
agree.
it.
I don't think I even really found myself or started getting comfortable until college. Like, someone said to me recently that I'm a great public speaker, and I was like, I think it's just because I'm comfortable with myself. And when I'm talking about a topic, and I wasn't always like that. It took a really long time to realize who I am, what I stand for, and then realizing again that it's okay to be who you are, whether it's a perfect or not,
Yeah.
and finding your identity of who you are is really important, and it's an important step on that kind of journey.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Kate says the first step to being good at something is kind of sucking at something.
That's great, Kate. I love that.
Yeah. I think some of the most inspiring advice I've seen online is to fail faster. Like, that made me feel better about it, especially as a business owner now, because I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna make mistakes, gonna keep making mistakes. And then you get good at one thing, you're like, okay, try something new, and you don't want to start over and then suck at it again. But every time you start doing something new, you do have to start back over. And it's
Yeah.
Oh,
And kudos to you guys too, because becoming a small business owner is really embracing imperfection. That's a really big step, to be brave, step out of your comfort zone, try something new, recognizing that failure happens, and just embracing what you love to do, which is really, really important, I think. And that's just another kind of topic I thought of as I was thinking of the ways that we embrace being imperfect, is being a business owner, starting your own business, new jobs, that kind of stuff.
yeah. I was reading a book about the progression of becoming a business owner, right? And they called it a technician, but basically you have a skill set, you're doing it. At some point you get frustrated with your company or your boss, and you're like, well, why am I doing this for them? I could do it for myself. And what you don't realize is the further you get into having your business, the less of the actual work you're going to be doing, because you're going to be running a business instead.
Yes, absolutely. You're doing more of the strategy behind the business and growing the business, and you're not necessarily doing that thing that you really liked to do, the technician part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally agree. Definitely.
I think I forgot to do this at the beginning, but people watching, we are paying attention. If you have any questions, please, please, please chime in and let us know what your experiences are too, because it's interesting to get a group talking, and these are things that so many people experience.
Yeah, I'd love to hear any questions if anybody wants to jump in and share share your experiences with us and share how you might have battled imperfection or just recognizing that failure is okay.
Yeah, I kind of want to go back to goal setting because I feel like learning how to set goals well was a whole process and took years and years.
Mm-hmm.
And I have this, actually, I have a book.
Oh, more books. We're going to put links for all these books online for everybody, right?
I got the first few. I'm going to have to rewatch it and see what some of the other ones were. So this is my planner.
Oh.
And it breaks down the different areas of your life, which is something that a few different books do. Like Designing Your Life is a good one where it talks about like kind of the quadrants.
Yeah.
So this one is specific to goals. This is like my goal setting planner. And that flower, like each area is filled in based on how, well or satisfied I am with that area of my life. And you're talking about dropping those balls. And I'm like, that is a constant assessment of like, what's fluctuating, what's great, what's not. And like right now, it's basically like kids and work are filled out and everything else. Oh, Jane's laughing at me.
It's smaller.
Yeah, everything else is smaller. And
That's cool.
I set my goals based around that graphic. And I think that's almost misleading because I'm trying to fill in the rest of the areas, but you're never going to get them all filled in. And the reason that only a couple are filled in is because they're so high priority and I'm never going to stop working on them to do the other ones. So maybe I should just be happy with my skewed little crooked flower.
Yeah. And that's also, yes. And you're kind of just explaining that same thing about setting expectations. You should totally be okay with your skewed imperfect because the flower is never going to be perfect. It's never going to be a fully formed flower. And I think we as humans are the ones that are always thinking about like, where can I keep growing or where can I improve or this part of my life could be better or, oh, I want that house or I want that car or I want this or I want that or I want to have kids. And there's always going to be those parts of the flower that aren't filled exactly where we want them to. And one, it's about being comfortable and okay with the fact that those parts of the flower aren't filled. And I really like this analogy of flower. Now I'm just going to keep using it. But it's also about making like small goals, smart goals that, aren't necessarily expectations that you have to meet all of them, but maybe they're just something small. Like I have expectations for myself with exercising. And maybe this past summer, as the quarantine happened, I was not working out at all. And I completely fell off the bus. I couldn't even see the bus in the distance.
Same.
And so I'm like beating myself up a little bit where I'm like, oh, I gained this weight or, oh, I'm eating really bad or, oh, I used to be able to run. And so instead of, setting this expectation of what I used to be and where I should be, maybe I just make a small goal that's okay. I'm going to start walking the dog every day or every other day and do, a mile walk, something that's small, measurable, a way that I can just fill that flower a little bit without feeling like I need to fill it all the way, because then the minute I try to fill it all the way, something else is gonna drop, so to speak. But I also like the idea that you mentioned about prioritizing your petals in a way, like family, pretty much like they're the top petals. That's how they are. And that's always gonna shift too. And recognizing that it's okay for that to shift and priorities are gonna shift, and being realistic in self-improvement is totally okay as well.
Yeah.
I really like that.
A couple of comments that we got. Cool. Jen says, I am loving all your words of wisdom from both of you. Thanks, Jen. I am hard on myself every day to get a ton of things done and make myself and everyone around me happy. I try to tell myself daily to slow down and enjoy every small moment because they won't come again and life is short.
Oh, that's so special. Was that Jen again?
That was Jen, yeah.
That was Jen. Oh, Jen, I think you do a great job of that too with the things you do with nature and like spending time. Jen and I do walks together, and I think you do a great job of slowing down and enjoying the moment by the way that you prioritize, spending time outdoors, because that's really important. Like I also find it very valuable to think about your own mental health and well-being and to remind yourself, I don't have to do everything. And
but I do.
What am I going to do for Jen today? you know, and what's going to help me and my well-being long term. And maybe it's walking my dog or going for a walk or a hike. Maybe it's spending time with my kids at the park. That's what's helping my mental health and reminding me that I don't have to do everything.
In the grocery store.
In the grocery store.
Because that's our version of the playground, apparently.
That's your version of the playground. Sorry. Maybe it's going to the grocery store and buying a banana with your kids. That's your way of taking care of your mental health and your well-being. And I think that's completely healthy and needed for everybody. What are you doing for you today? Kate always tells me that too. What are you doing for mental health? What are you doing for you?
Oh, we should have just gotten all your friends on this call too.
I know. Kate should have joined. I'm referencing Kate a bunch.
Yeah. Side note, there's too many Jens. Everyone has a friend Jen, if not more than one.
Everyone has a Jen. Oh,
everyone has a Jen.
True. I think I have two Jens, maybe 3 Jens.
Yeah, I mean, I am a Jen and I still have Jens. Jane says, to go back to perfection, I find that we shouldn't make decisions out of fear.
Oh, I really like that, Jane. Now, Jane, when you say making decisions out of fear, is it like fear of disappointment? Fear of, I guess that's how I took that. Like,
Tell us about your fears, Jane.
So when I say making decisions out of fear, I think of like fear that I'm going to disappoint someone. That's why I would immediately say, oh yes, I can do that. Or yes, I'll be there right now. Or, oh yeah, I can pick up my niece from school. So
I saw a joke about the lie we always tell each other, like, I'll be there in 5 minutes, but you haven't left your house yet.
I am the most guilty person of that. Ever.
Yeah. Well, and I was like, why on earth do we do that? And it's like, because
we do that.
Yeah, are we really afraid that they're going to be upset that we didn't leave earlier? So then we have to pretend that it's traffic or something?
Yes. And then I'm like notorious for like showing up 5 minutes late with my Dunkin' Donuts. Like,
yeah,
trying to stop at Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah.
That's late. Oh, it's too funny. But yeah, why do we do things like that? Why do we feel the need to people please so much? And something that I think plays a huge role in this is social media. I'm sure you could agree, just especially with our generation, how things like Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all the different social media feeds have grown. Sometimes you feel like you're comparing yourself to others, and you might feel like you need to people please so that you're at that level, or you feel like they're at a different level than you are. And I try really hard not to compare myself. Sometimes I take like social media breaks completely just for my own mental health and well-being, because you know, the grass is always going to look greener on the other side.
Yeah, it does.
And so you have to realize that, and then you got to think somebody else is probably looking at your grass thinking it's greener. So you never even think about the fact that someone else might be comparing themselves to you, thinking you have it all.
Yeah.
It's really about finding like, how do you feel the most fulfilled, you know, and where do you feel the most fulfilled? What are you thankful for? What are you grateful for? Did Jane add anything else about that fear comment?
Yeah, she said fear of people stealing your ideas and fear of people being offended by something.
That offensive one is, I'm real guilty of that one too, Jane. And I think that goes back, again, this book, Jane, you should check this out, the Brave Not Perfect book I mentioned. Fear of someone being offended. Like, that's about stepping back and realizing, you know, you're not always going to please everyone. And being brave and still sharing your ideas is so important. And sometimes people are going to be offended, and sometimes it is important to, you know, reconcile relationships, but other times it's just as important to share your idea and share your voice and be brave, as she says in the book, for young girls to realize speaking at the table and sharing what you think is most important. So that kind of hit home with me, that idea, Jane.
I think one thing, I get really hung up about how people might perceive things, and a lot of times people don't, I'm trying to think of a positive way to say this, people don't care about you as much as you do, but not in a bad way. Like, they're not deeply analyzing every sentence you say. They just hear it, they get initial impression, maybe they think that's a little weird, but they don't spend the time to analyze exactly why you said what you said. They're just like, whatever, I'll talk to her tomorrow.
Like after a big presentation and maybe you fumbled over something, or like
that too. Yeah, nobody's
about it later and you're like, oh my God, everyone noticed it.
And I've been doing more public speaking, and like I have coworkers who are doing public speaking, and sometimes someone will ask like for a critique of their performance, what could I do better? And like I find one or two things, and they're like, I stuttered at the beginning. This is a habit of mine. I do this all the time. And you're like, well, I didn't notice that at all. So that's not a glaring flaw with your presentation. That's like one little piece that probably most people won't notice.
Absolutely. I think it's, yes, sometimes maybe that anxiety takes route and kind of makes you like build it up in your head a lot more than it actually needed to be. And you're thinking more about how someone perceived you when in doubt, like you don't really know how they perceived you. You're not in their brain. You don't know what they thought. And I'm so guilty of that too. I can completely agree with you. And the important thing is to, again, take a step back and realize that, you know, not every little thing is going to be noticed by someone else, and not everything that worries you is going to worry someone else. We just have to give ourselves grace. I mentioned that earlier, just like give yourself a little grace in the fact that you're doing a good job. You're doing a great job in your life. You're, you know, living the best life you can possibly be doing, which is really important. That's what I try to tell myself.
Yeah, I was going to say, I get emotional when people tell me I'm doing a good job.
So that was another thing she mentioned in, Brene Brown mentions in one of her videos about like celebrating what you're doing as you accomplish it. I'm one of those people that sometimes I'm so futuristic in my thinking, like, oh, I want to be here. I want to achieve this. I want to do this. I want to be involved in this, that I don't stop to actually be grateful and happy for the little things along the way that I'm doing to lead to the bigger things.
Oh, all that conversation about journey versus destination. And I bet you a ton of people would say journey. And yet, again, like our actions don't kind of echo that, because we're got to get here. This is the goal. Got to do this. But if it really is about the journey, then it's got to be like, okay, the process of getting there is what's important, not necessarily the end point. Sorry, Jane made a comment. Perfectionism could be OCD, which I think is a really good point that we should talk about, is that a lot of us suffer from this, but there might be some people who what you're experiencing is not normal. And she says it may not be a bad idea to check yourself out to make sure what you're feeling is, you know, the same kind of perfectionism everyone else is feeling versus like, you know, a mental illness.
Too much. And I think, and I was reading actually an article in the Harvard Business Review. They did a study on college students and perfectionism. And a lot of times it can lead to depression or anxiety. So it is really important for people to recognize and either talk to your friends about it or be open to talking to someone else about it. I'm a big supporter of therapy. I love the idea of therapy and think it's totally fine for people to do it if you need it. But yeah, recognizing that sometimes too much perfectionism, you should check in with yourself for your mental well-being.
Yeah. So let's talk about therapy, because that's something that I feel like people are trying very hard to normalize. And like our culture just stigmatizes it, and it's hard to fight back and push it, but like it really should be a normal thing to do, because we all need help. And as much as friends are great for venting to, they're not trained professionals. They're going to say bad things that are going to trigger you. They're going to make mistakes. They're not always going to be perfect about supporting you. So, and even the mental health professionals sometimes are guilty of this. Why are you here if you don't have a problem, right? Because my first ever therapy appointment, I was just curious. Like, what is this about? How can I get value out of this? And I went in that room and she was just like, couldn't figure out what to do with me.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, because I didn't come in with a specific problem. So
I've never had that. Well, I think my experiences with therapy have always been related to like anxiety, you know, and actually that's where like my therapist recommended this book, because of, you know, like you need to give yourself grace and realize that by creating so many unrealistic expectations, you're causing yourself anxiety, you know, when you don't pass it. The other thing you mentioned, a really quick point that I wrote down before I forgot, was, yeah, using your friends as like a therapist is not always healthy, because and going back to that idea of comparison, sometimes like even when you're venting to your friends, you might feel like you're comparing yourself to them too, in a way. And you might feel like, oh, well, she has it all together, or, oh, she's doing this and I talked to her about this, but her life sounds perfect. It's healthy to get like a non-biased, party to talk to, I think. And just to find somebody who's a professional that can really help you with overcoming anxiety, if that is anxiety or if it is OCD, and helping you find healthy tactics to tackle it as well, which I think is really important because you have to have healthy coping mechanisms, just to kind of go along with that.
Yeah. Yeah, one thing I remember reading about was for a few different illnesses, not having a good baseline for what's normal. And so that makes it really hard to know if you need treatment, to know if you should be worried about something, if this is normal behavior or not. And that is something that a therapist can tell you.
Absolutely. Having a professional, just sharing your thoughts and being vulnerable with somebody and your experiences, they can definitely help you realize if it's completely unhealthy.
Yeah. And you know what? We talked about like comparing to your friends and their lives look better and feeling envy, but there's maybe a darker side to that is when a lot of friends you have in common have bad habits or they're in bad situations and then you think, oh, that's okay, right? Like all of my friends, boyfriends or husbands like beat them. So mine only yells at me. That's okay. No, you need a new baseline. You need to talk to someone who can tell you what's healthy and what's not.
Definitely. It's that comparison factor is really important to take out of the equation, so to speak.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry. That was a darker.
No, that's okay. I'm glad Jane mentioned this topic though, because I think it is really important. I'm not a professional, so I think it is really important to share with people resources of what to do when perfectionism is just too much, or even just, maybe you don't feel like you have like a disorder or anything like that, but maybe you just need a life coach, or maybe you just need somebody to talk you through like battling this perfectionism idea. And there are a lot of great life coaches out there. One of my therapists was a life coach at one point, so it was really cool to she was kind of like more of my life coach in a way, like helping me create realistic goals and realizing like, hey, you're not setting a good expectation for yourself here that's not healthy for you. So life coaches are great outlet as well.
Yeah. So I was going to say, I was very skeptical of life coaches initially because I was like, I just pay someone and they talk to me and they, don't necessarily have like degrees or whatever. But in practice, not in theory, in practice, I think I like it better because like I said, that I've talked to a couple different therapists. One was shortly after giving birth and she thought maybe I had postpartum, and she was very quick to be like, medication, tests, this and that. And I was like, I'm so sleep deprived. Why don't we fix that first? And see how I feel, and then maybe we'll think about it, right? And she just jumped straight to medication. And I feel like life coaches, because that's not their first priority, because they don't have the ability to prescribe you stuff, they're more likely to kind of take in the holistic view of your life, and let's talk through this, and let's try that, and here's some great self-help books, because they all have read all the books. So I've had a really good experience with the coaches I've worked with, both for business and for life. And like the therapists were good too. Cool. Their tactics were just a little different. And I wasn't ready for that at the time.
Too, like finding the right therapist or life coach for you if you need it. You know what I mean? Because some people use different tactics, and some people, are going to use different types of therapy. So finding that right mixture and fit is important too.
My sister told me it's like dating. So you just want to see one therapist and you want to be done, right? But it's a relationship, and relationships take time, and you have to find the right one. So exactly what you were saying, Gigi, like you got to date around. You got to date a lot of therapists and find the right one.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you go through different stages in your life where you might need it and maybe you don't need it as much, like you said, after having your child, like was kind of a primary time where you did need to talk to somebody, but perhaps you got through that rough period and you are doing better, and maybe you don't need to make the time for it as much. So it kind of depends on your life experiences and when things will occur too.
Yeah. We have a tiny bit of a lag, so some of the comments came at the wrong time.
That's
but
okay.
Jane, I see you and I'm paying attention to your comments. I'm sorry that we didn't respond to them.
Yeah, I'm just looking. I'm trying to see if I can see the comments on my phone while I'm looking. Jane, thank you for all your comments. We really appreciate your participation.
Okay, well, I feel like there's 10 different topics we could keep digging into here, but We're going on 50 minutes, so I think we'll wind down.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I appreciate you guys having me and
well,
talk.
I was going to say, you're not done yet. The last thing I
Oh,
ask everyone is about their goals and where do you want to be in 5 years?
oh, that's a good question. Thinking about my goals, I mean, I'm taking on a new job position, so I just want to keep growing and learning in general. Um, Definitely in the field that I currently work in. And I guess when I think about my goals and where I want to be, I want to continue my education, definitely. I finished my master's a few years ago, so I'd like to keep going for a doctorate long term.
Oh, wow.
Um, but
Get
that
it.
might be in 5 years. That might be a little longer.
Yeah.
I'm not going to set an expectation for myself of a date or deadline for that one. So setting measurable goals and good goals, but I think like one of my biggest goals is just learning and growing, no matter what field, no matter what job I'm in, and you know what I'm studying or working on. I just want to make sure that I'm continuing to grow. And I know that's such a broad-based goal to
Oh,
say,
no, it's a good one, though.
but that would be my biggest goal, is just learning, growing. I want to keep networking and meeting people and learning things that are outside of my comfort zone too, because I think that's really important. Yeah.
Um, I'm so sorry. Goals. I feel like the further away the timeline we're talking about, the more vague the goal has to be.
Yeah.
Because you don't know where you'll be in 5 years, right? So, and that's what I do with mine. I set my goals for the year and I set areas. I'm going to
Hmm.
focus on family. I'm going to focus in the fall. I'm going to focus on tradition because it's like holidays
Yeah.
and Christmas, right? So it's very vague. And then for this month, it's more specific. For this week, it's to-do items.
Yeah. This past year, I bought my first home. So that was one of my like measurable goals, where I was like, you know, in the next couple of years, I want to buy a house. And then it happened to be last year that it happened. But I like how you're saying you break them down year by year. Like, you know, the longer term goals you set, the more broad they can be, you know, and maybe it's just, I want to work in a field that I'm passionate about, that I love my job and really enjoy what I'm doing, and I'm making an impact. That's probably what everybody would say is their long-term goal.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, maybe not
But
everyone.
the good thing is when they're broad, you can learn to adjust them, because goals can completely be adjustable and can be modified, depending on what you accomplish and depending on what you learn about yourself in the process.
Jane says her 5-year plan is Disney World.
Jane, I love that you have a 5-year plan.
Um,
Great.
okay, and then I typically ask this of my small business owners, but I'll ask you too. Is there a way that the people in this group can support you?
Um, I think really just what I'm hoping to get out of this group is just networking and learning from other people. So not necessarily, I'm not selling anything, or you don't have to, you know, follow my page on anything that specific. I'm involved in several nonprofits, so add me as a friend. I'd love to share with you some of the things that I have that I'm passionate about, that hopefully we can have a shared passion for. But then I also want to learn what you're doing, because maybe there's a passion out there that I don't even realize I have yet, and I want to get involved with, or I want to support your business and learn more about that field. So really just networking, I think. I think this group can just help me with networking, connect with me.